If you've been trying comprehensible input methods for a while and not getting the results that you want, it may have to do with your brain. If you've been struggling to get results, people have probably told you that you just need to be patient, keep getting more and more input, and that eventually, at some point, it's just going to click in and you will be able to speak the language very naturally as if it was your mother tongue. But what if all of that wasn't entirely true, and there were some specific traits in your brain that are making the success of comprehensible input for you specifically much more difficult than for many of those other people you see online who are having great success with this method? Now, in this video, I'm going to cover the 5 most important traits that your brain may have and that you're not aware of, and that are going to determine whether comprehensible input methods are going to be truly effective for you, or whether you should be actually combining them with other methods that are going to allow you to have much faster results. If this is the first time you see one of my videos, my name is Esther. I am a doctor in language education. I have learned 9 languages throughout my life. I have trained and worked for 4+ years as a professional translator and interpreter. I was a language teacher for over 10 years, and now I help ambitious students who are really struggling to see the results they want in their target language so they can understand their brain and make faster progress. Just a quick note, if you have ever taken the Brain Learn Language Profiler, the BLLP test, make sure you have your results at hand, because you're going to be able to map some of the traits I'm going to mention to your own results, and you will be able to immediately tell if comprehensible input it's actually the right method for you, or whether you may have to adapt your method in order to make it more effective. Now, the first of these traits, it's your brain's tolerance for ambiguity or for uncertainty. In other words, how comfortable it's your brain with not understanding everything that it hears or that it reads. So, for example, imagine when you are listening to a podcast or when you are reading a text, you are naturally going to encounter words that are not familiar, expressions that you've never come across, even grammar structures that you may not fully understand without some sort of explanation. What we see from research is that there are brains that are going to be extremely comfortable with that. They're just going to skim through it, they're going to get the gist of the text or of the video, and they're going to be perfectly fine to continue listening or to continue reading and to try to understand what happens next. However, we do also see from research that other brains just do not enjoy that. And the moment they come across a word or an expression or something that it's new that they're not familiar with and that they cannot fully understand, it's like their brain goes in a little loop, they get stuck in there, and they stop listening or paying attention to whatever comes next. This, of course, isn't very useful when the whole point of the method you are using is to just relax and be able to listen and listen and listen and absorb as you go along. If your brain doesn't really enjoy this uncertainty of not understanding absolutely everything, what is going to happen is that every time it finds one of these words that it's new, it's going to have a little stress peak in your brain. That stress is going to trigger a chemical reaction that is going to involve a number of substances in your brain, among which cortisol. Cortisol is the hormone of stress. And the problem is that when certain parts of your brain are flooded with cortisol, even if it's just a little peak, they temporarily stop working. And unfortunately, those parts of the brain are actually heavily involved in understanding language. So if you are using comprehensible input methods, and every time your brain finds a word it doesn't understand, it's going to trigger a chemical reaction in your brain that it's going to stop certain language brain regions from working. That explains why you suddenly cannot continue listening and understanding what happens. That is something that needs to be addressed. And I'm sure if your brain has this trait, you are nodding right now, because students that score very high on this trait are usually aware of it, and they'll tell you, yeah, that's exactly what happens. I feel like a wall the moment there is a word or an expression that I don't fully understand, and it's like somehow I can't get through that wall and I cannot continue reading or listening. So if you have this trait, it doesn't mean that comprehensible input is not going to work for you, but it means that it's going to be more difficult because your brain basically doesn't like this kind of high uncertainty type of exercise. We need to develop a little bit your ability to handle uncertainty and ambiguity, because that's part of using a foreign language. It doesn't matter how fluent you are or how much you practice, but we're going to do that through scaffolded tasks that are going to slowly increase your ability to handle uncertainty and ambiguity in the language, rather than throwing you at the deep end of the pool, which is basically what a lot of these comprehensible input methods do when they expose you to all of this massive input. The second trait, it's your ability to focus attention on the details. A lot of students are very holistic learners. They listen, they think they understand, they get the general meaning of what they are listening to, what they are reading. But their brain is not paying attention to the little details. And believe me, in language learning, the devil is in the details. What happens when you are trying to learn through comprehensible input, but your brain is not unconsciously paying attention to details, is that you are missing a lot of the little things that happen in a language that are giving you extra information about the person that is speaking, the context, the object of the conversation. All of those details matter. And the fact that your brain is not picking them up, it means that it cannot replicate them either. So what we see quite often with the students who have learned through comprehensible input methods like this, but their brain doesn't naturally pay attention to details, is that they may sound relatively fluent, but they make a lot of mistakes. Their level of accuracy is actually well below their level of fluency, and they don't even realize it. Now, the third trait in your brain that it's going to make it difficult to learn just through comprehensible input, it's your ability to recognize patterns in the language. Now, this is a little bit what we call statistical learning. This is what children do. Children are very, very good at statistical learning. That means that they'll observe, they'll hear, they'll absorb everything, and then they'll be able to imitate it. Now, as adults, we don't all have the same ability for statistical learning that kids usually have. Some adults still maintain more of that ability, so it's not like black or white. It's really a continuum. There are going to be some people that are really comfortable just looking at the reality around them and extracting patterns. And there's going to be other people, they're going to prefer to know what's happening and then look around them. When you are learning a language, that means that you probably prefer to understand the rules before jumping into a text or a video where you don't really understand many of the constructions that are being used. It doesn't mean that you won't be able to identify them naturally. It just means that you're forcing your brain to do something that it doesn't really enjoy. Your brain is expecting clear rules that it can then try to map out in the input. By not giving it any grammar or any rules, your brain is feeling a bit out of water. And that is going to increase that substance I told you about, cortisol, the stress hormone. And again, it's going to block a part of your brain that it's going to make it much more difficult for your brain to do the thing it knows how to do best, which is learn. So, in case you hadn't realized, a lot of these traits are eventually manifestations of the different chemical reactions that naturally and unconsciously take place in our brain when we are trying to learn and to use a foreign language. The fourth trait that your brain may have is your ability to code and to remember information. Coding covers the type of sense that your brain prefers using in order to be exposed to new information. So it could be your eyes, it could be your ear. So you could be more of a visual learner, you could be more of an auditory learner. What sometimes I see is that there is a mismatch between how students are trying to learn a language and how their brain really prefers and excels at learning. I've seen many students who were told to just listen. But when we tested, we realized that this is a highly visual learner who was, funny enough, told to never look at the text while they were listening and just focus on what they could hear. Now, if you have a very good phonological awareness, if you have a very good auditory memory and you're really good at discerning sounds, that is probably the right advice. But if on the contrary, your phonological ability is rather low, you're not able to identify sounds, you cannot really remember things that you just hear, and you need to see them written, then by not looking at the text, you are basically depriving your brain from learning through its preferred means, which is your eyes. And the same goes for reading. Some students really insist on reading, but because they're not necessarily aware of what their visual and auditory ability is, instead of benefiting from the gift they've got, they are basically shutting down a way of learning that would give them much faster results. And then the fifth trait that we need to consider, it's your brain's ability to process information fairly fast. When you are using comprehensible input methods, as they are promoted today, which I will get into detail in another video of what it really means, comprehensible input, but I'm just assuming comprehensible input methods are all methods that tell you to just be exposed to massive input and just try to absorb the language from there. When you are trying to use these comprehensible input methods that are encouraging you to use a lot of authentic materials at normal pace and just listen to them so that you can get used to the melody and the intonation of the language, which is not a bad thing, by the way. But the problem is that depending on your brain's ability to process very fast-paced input, you're going to benefit more or less from that input. If your brain is showing signs that it does not enjoy very fast-paced input, that it doesn't like handling several tasks at the same time, for example, listening while trying to remember the first part, while trying to guess what that word means, while trying to deduce the meaning of that expression, then your brain may just be basically overwhelmed. And again, overwhelm leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to a spike in cortisol. Spike in cortisol leads to your brain kind of shutting down at least some parts of it. And you basically not learning nowhere nearly as much as you could have been learning if you had used input that was either more adapted to the pace your brain is comfortable handling, or other strategies that are going to allow you to still work with authentic materials at a natural pace, but that are going to allow your brain to build slowly its ability to handle that, rather than, again, throwing you at the deep end of the pool and then having to deal with all the anxiety consequences that come with it. If you are struggling with comprehensible input methods and you feel like you should be much farther along, considering the number of hours you have already put in, and you're having thoughts of feeling like this, maybe I'm not good enough for languages, this isn't for me, maybe I should just give up, all these people probably have a gift that I don't have. I want you to reframe all those thoughts. It isn't that you're not good at languages. It's simply that you're not using the right strategies for how your unique brain actually works. And this is like trying to install Windows on a Mac computer or, putting diesel on an electric car. It's not that one thing is better than the other. They're just not made for each other. And there should be no shame in just recognizing, right, this method isn't for me. I need to change my strategies and start doing something that is going to get me closer to the results I want faster in a more effective way. Now, just as a last reminder, because every time I talk about comprehensible input, people misunderstand me. Comprehensible input as such, and input in general, it's hugely important, okay? Hugely important. But you're going to need to adapt the input and the way you are leveraging the input in a way that works for your brain. There is no point in trying to swim upstream when there is a way to swim downstream and still get to the same place. So if you have been using comprehensible input methods for a while, again, not seeing the kind of results you want, think about these 5 traits. Think about how they apply to you and consider whether there is something that you need to change in the strategies you're using that is going to help you have faster results and also enjoy the language learning process much more. And if you're thinking like, I'm not entirely sure if this trait applies to me or how I would score on this trait, first, think about it, because I find most students, when we talk about this, they actually able to tell themselves quite quickly. But if you're still unsure, feel free to take the BLLP test. The link should be in the description. It's about 15-20 minutes. It's going to give you your profile, and it's also going to suggest the strategies that might be helpful for your specific type of brain. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more content like this to understand a bit better how your unique brain actually learns languages, make sure you subscribe to the channel. And if you have some extra time, I recommend you watch this other video next, where I discuss in much more detail how the brain actually learns languages and things that you should definitely know if you want to make faster progress. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.